Hi, glad you're here. And the special graphics I've got here are a good way for me to relax, and I can talk about other things. The Gatayu here, the fish prints are, I think that's a golden shiner, but that's a little tougher than looking at them in a jar. And we'll move right ahead. I'm a little confused why the slide looks like that. Is it two slides on top of one?
No, it's because you did it as a set Acrobat instead of a PowerPoint, so I had to put it in Word. Click this down arrow right here.
Oh.
So whenever it tells you, just click down.
Yep.
Thank you, sorry.
It might go rotate down a little bit. I think there might be another top to that slide. Okay. Yeah, I used a new part of this PowerPoint fanciness, and there's supposed to be some letters across the top that say where, what, when. And it's about detecting and knowing where these fish are. Tracking, sometimes you can use the modern technology maybe of signals that come off of the fish or just little cells that come out with environmental DNA. But the old method, of course, is just catching them with techniques of seining or electrofishing. So the where that's missing up there is the key to this talk, that how do you find out where they are? Of course, you know the what, where, when series that you normally hear, but where is the biggest question, I think, in small fish. If you get the what right, of course, the what is, in particular, two shiners, swallowtail and comely shiner, that are hard to identify, and they've been neglected, I would say, in many of our southern New York drainages. But they're the blessing of New York's wealth of fish. Different drainages have some species still doing well, and some in more dire circumstances. In the Susquehanna drainage, we have a shortage of these two species and a substantial decline. And the time series that goes usually with most fish in New York back to the 30s, and a wealth of information there. And then I'm taking a separate from that the most recent 25 years, and then the last 2 years where there's been some collecting in the spots where we thought we would have the greatest chance of catching them. Woo. There we go. Bottom. Ready? Right down here. It's not working. Hold on. So it used to be that people would come in with a rotary of slides, and then they'd go over and they'd tip them over, and the slides would be on the floor. And that was a good reason to scramble. So the Susquehanna watershed, of course, includes everything from the Chesapeake Bay upwards, but in New York, the Biological Survey started by saying that the Chemung is separate from the Susquehanna. We're combining them for this talk. But there's a lot of differences between the geography of those two basins and the fish distribution. But these two fish that I call unremarkable are overlapping a lot in their range. And it made sense to combine these two. They're, I don't think, any way particularly related, except they're both in the same streams. I like to say if you're in a forest and there's an ash tree and a maple tree, they don't really care much about each other, but they're both there. You might think that they're related while they're in the same forest. The same with these two.
Slide it down.
Thanks, Tiernan. Yeah, great. So as I say, they're caught in some of the same streams. There's 87 streams where both fish have been caught at some time, and 27, or about a quarter of them, they've been caught in the same stream. Well, of course, from the bottom downstream into the upstream, there's a lot of chances that it won't be in the same spot, but indeed a fraction of the spots have caught both fish at the same time. And using electricity, that's usually pretty good about saying the fish was there at the spot where you caught it, instead of a seine where you might push them in and make them be together when they otherwise might not have been. The difficulty of hand lens, the difficulty of identifying them in the field is often solved with having a hand lens, or these little cells that you can put the fish with some water and hold it up to the sunlight. We've got wonderful, strong eyes that can see things out in the sunlight, that you get them in a laboratory after they've been preserved. The field collecting is a powerful tool to be able to see the fish with its light colors and And then you've got to have some go to the museum, put them in a preservative, and have them be confirmed and looked at all those years later. Thanks. So the fish, I guess this is meant to speak about the two watersheds and the records that have been available up to this time, until a month ago, were from the State Museum and DEC's records, is largely from the Fish Atlas, being able to draw all the way back to prior to 1930s. And the two species are pretty rare, as I say here, that the swallowtail shiner is in 9 streams, and the comely shiner in 6. And that's in a fairly broad time frame, I guess 20 years, 26 years. And as you might say, how am I supposed to identify this fish? The one on the left, the swallowtail, it could look like a mimic, it could look like a spot-tail shiner. The one on the right, you might think it's an emerald shiner, you might think it's a rosy face, but indeed, when you look underneath the jaw, the lower jaw pigmentation tells you it's a comely shiner. And it doesn't really matter what it looks like to us. The fish knows where it's supposed to be. It's got some very specialized habits, and I'll be speaking more about some of the habitats that comely shiner. To me, it's almost astounding that this little fish could be in the big waters of Seneca Lake, as well as in the streams where most people know about it. So we've got a good system here. Tiernan maybe sees me start to push the button. I know Tiernan well, and I'm glad for his help. So the declines in the range of these two fish can be looked at many ways, and I've chose two fairly simple: frequency of occurrence and the number of streams that it still can be found in. So as I said in the earlier slide, the records coming from DEC and from the State Museum, or all the museums combined, put them in this frequency occurrence, and we have a time frame that this is only comparing the 1930s, which is a very robust data set compared to this last 20 years, and it's a dramatic decline. And I like to use 20%, 10%, as one species is still in 20% of the frequency occurrence abundance kind of estimate, and the other 10. And then the number of streams that it can still be caught in is in a similar percentage range for that quite different metric. So doing Google searches about the Susquehanna and these minnows, I came across this Susquehanna River Basin Commission report series, and Luann Steffi is the main author on some, and Doug Henning is another fish expert with that group. But they have reports online, and I contacted them by phone and found that they have a data set that has more collections, more comprehensive survey collections in this basin than was available for that earlier calculation. And it was readily shared, but the people that I've talked to in New York that know about the Susquehanna River Basin Commission know very much about the eel recovery work, but not so much about their water quality sampling, which included fish, which is a very impressive data set to have probably 80 collection sites in the New York portion of these two basins. Wow, something sure missing on that one.
How about this one?
Yeah, so this is what is enhanced with this extra information from the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, that, as I say, there's 3 more streams, and that brings it up to 12. And 12, you might say, well, it's almost a quarter more, still a tiny, tiny number. And then for the comely shiner, it added 5 more, bringing it up to 11, almost doubled it. So I'll have a map here that shows those combined data sets. It really, you might say, why separate them? But this is quite a new discovery, and I don't know how the archival part of it, or whether they're stored and confirmed. I'm confident that the background that this guy comes from, Doug Henning, has looked at them closely, but it might require follow-up to see if these streams, the sampling approach that the Susquehanna River Basin Commission used was more assertive, more the sampling that I'm acquainted with on big rivers is go to where they're not so big and where you can use your equipment and you won't get swept away. You can't get out in the middle of the stream, but the Susquehanna River Basin Commission team had large shockers and larger crews, So most of the occurrences I'm aware of were upstream in the smaller components where you can use your ear more effectively, but added a tremendous perspective to this with there being in this downstream areas at Neoga down by Whitney Point and more parts of the Susquehanna. So here we put the two species together with all of their records from both of those institutional frameworks, and you can see that the blue is the comely shiner. Are lots of records in the Susquehanna, the main stem, as well as in some of the major tributaries. And if you look on the left side of the frame, where there's not concentrated so much, a lot more X's, a lot fewer O's. So that X means the historic range, and the circle is those current, more recent records. So as I say at the bottom, wherever you see X's without O's, that's range lost. So the tougher part of this perspective of what do you do about these fish, first you have to find out where they are. If you find that their range is lost, what are you going to do about it? What conservation efforts might be directed at this species at risk? And the most important thing is to maintain a current database. Where can they still be found? If something happens, a detrimental water quality change in a certain area, you might know to go in and do some recovery efforts, to move some to a safer spot. I've seen this about some trout studies in the West, that they know these forest fire problems, that they knew a special place where this fish was, and they knew that the ash was going to come in and kill the fish, and they were able to relocate them. Well, if we don't know where the comely shiners and swallowtail shiners are, that's one element of it. It's just knowing where they are. It's the simplest, where are they? Can you still catch them there? And a nice appraisal of what's known about it is in these species status assessments that are online from the DEC's website. A nice up-to-date feature. Smaller fishes with conservation efforts are not as eligible for the kinds of things we know about for larger fishes. You're probably not going to have a hatchery program. And even if you do have more fish to put in a place where they used to be, you've got to know why they aren't there anymore. Refugia areas might be a more credible effort to think of conservation where you have to protect the habitat. And I'll be speaking about some of these refugia areas as we go along. So the Nature Conservancy used the term exemplary habitats that I think the next one down might have more of that information. No, yeah, it does. There was quite a bit there that's missing, but this has pointing out those exemplary habitats that a place on Catatonk Creek at Candor has been a very diverse assemblage of fish, and I saw from the abstract of one of the mussel studies that Catatonk Creek has high diversity of mussels also. So the water quality is good and the habitat's special, so it doesn't matter which organism group you're looking at, it's got some very special things happening, and indeed you can protect both of these kinds of fish in that vicinity. The big bend in the river has vast marshlands that are carrying subsurface water, so there's lots of cool water there. And it might be that the predatory fish are in lesser numbers because we know that smallmouth bass, brown trout are eating minnows and they're harder to catch. They might be sustaining themselves, but they'll probably be below detection. And the pointer to the East Branch or Wego Creek is where another long-term data set comes from that SUNY ESF has advanced a study on this segment of the trout stream that has looked at the long-term record comparing the 1960s to current times, seeing that these fish aren't there any longer. So here's spots where they used to be, can't be caught any longer. It seems that way at Catatonk Creek, can't be caught any longer. And the one farthest to your right, the Cherry Valley Creek, has a miraculous, it was a miraculous good fortune that both species were able to be caught this past summer through efforts of Region 4 Fisheries and the State Museum. So these special areas, I give a little more information about them here. The Catatonk Creek, in the 1903, Cornell was taking classes down there and maintaining their, archiving their records so that they can be retrieved. And Casey Dillman still goes there with his class at Cornell, and that they have caught both of these species at different times, but not in the last 20 years. And detection is always the challenge. They go in with seining with the class, so it's fairly intensive with both electrofishing and seining. They haven't been caught in the last 20 years. East Branch of Wego Creek, I think 1960 was the last time these two fish were caught, and that's a few years more. A nice long-term record, and it's a stream that has had many habitat enhancement maneuvers for brook trout. And thank you. Cherry Valley Creek is got an unusual gradient with a kind of flattish spot through the middle of the landscape, and where Pleasant Brook comes in is a mile or so of meandering streams with subsurface water, great for brook trout, and these two species are probably having refugia in that Pleasant Brook vicinity. Otselic River headwaters near Morrisville were discovered as having swallowtail shiner by the professor at SUNY Morrisville, Bill Snyder. And the headlands of the Teofnioga at Little York Lake are a very special area for swallowtail shiner, that they're easily caught right in a kind of a special interest park. It's a picnic park with a small segment between streams, and the swallowtail shiners are just there. Tiny little area. So conclusions about inventory: you need to have reliable surveys, and they need to be updated. Biologists gathering the records must find collaborators and be part of a network, and that's sometimes best accomplished by coming to meetings like this. Both administrators and biologists need to be nurturing these networks, because one agency or one study group just can't do it with these small fish. Again, thank you. Conclusions about recovery programs. Smaller fish and their vulnerability to changes, you need to draw in a larger audience. We don't have special interest groups like Trout Unlimited and Sturgeon, the Sturgeon Watch groups, but there are interest groups for the small fish, and we need to seek them out and get a network of people interested in and can be proactive in their conservation. Imaginative approaches are needed, and perhaps it would be protecting a refugia area like this Catawba Creek confluence with Wilseyville Creek, or the headwaters of, well, particularly that Cherry Valley Creek. And it's like most areas of New York, it's under agricultural use, and the areas that can't be absconded by subdivisions or farming are still in pretty good condition, and that's certainly the case for this Pleasant Brook confluence. Lessons learned. Adaptive approaches are needed. You might think that electricity can do all the tricks for you, but some of these fish are out in the middle of the deep water, and you either have to have a barge or seining crews, and seining is pretty challenging in moderate gradient streams with width that you just have to get out in the water and move with the seine. The last item here is saying how it might turn out the comely shiner is a landmark part of the fish community. And then if I can have the next slide, the special features of some of these fish. We found that comely shiners, and they've been known to be part of the Seneca Lake fish community since the 30s, and they're in the Hudson River in the vicinity of Roloff Jansenkill and Stockport Creek, in the big water that's more lake-like, and they have very versatile capabilities. Like walleye, they can be in streams or they can be in lakes, so it's quite a lifestyle adaptation. I think we're getting close here. So my thanks for the 20 years that I was in DEC's Rare Fish Unit, working in this program area, and to the Susquehanna River Basin Commission for sharing their information. And Potsdam has been a good place for me. Last one.